Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the soft rustle of pages and the occasional whisper were the only sounds that broke the heavy silence of the Chicago Public Library. I stood in the center of the biography section, a cart of books beside me, methodically returning each tome to its rightful place. My fingers traced the spines of books chronicling lives far more exciting than my own, a stark reminder of the mundane existence I'd fallen into. Ethan? A voice startled me from my reverie. I turned to see Sarah, my coworker, peering at me with concern etched on her face. You've been staring at that shelf for 5 minutes. Everything okay? I forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as artificial as it felt. Yeah, just lost in thought. You know how it is. Sarah nodded, though her eyes betrayed her disbelief. Listen, a few of us are going out for drinks after work. Want to join? It might do you good to socialize a bit. The invitation hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I knew what they all thought of me. Ethan Parker, the reclusive librarian who preferred the company of books to people. They weren't entirely wrong. Thanks, but I've got plans. I lied, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Maybe next time. Sarah's smile faltered for a moment before she recovered. Sure, next time. Take care, Ethan. As she walked away, I felt a pang of regret. It wasn't that I didn't want friends or companionship, it was just easier this way. Safer. I turned back to my cart, losing myself once more in the monotony of shelving books. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of Dewey Decimal numbers and hushed conversations with patrons. Before I knew it, the library was closing, and I found myself walking out into the chilly Chicago evening. The city was alive around me, people rushing to and fro, laughter spilling out of bars and restaurants. I hunched my shoulders against the cold, feeling more alone than ever in the midst of the bustling crowd. My apartment was a good 30-minute walk away, but I preferred it to the cramped confines of public transportation. As I walked, my mind wandered to the empty apartment waiting for me. No one to greet me, no one to ask about my day, just silence and the leftovers in my fridge. The thought sat heavy in my chest, a constant companion I couldn't shake. I was so lost in my melancholy that I almost missed it. A pair of gleaming eyes watching me from the shadows of a narrow alley. I stopped short, my heart rate picking up as I peered into the darkness. Hello? I called out, immediately feeling foolish. It was probably just a stray dog or... A soft meow answered me, and a small black cat emerged from the shadows. It was thin, its fur matted in places, but its yellow eyes were bright and alert as it regarded me warily. Hey there, little one, I said softly, crouching down. The cat took a tentative step forward, then another. Are you lost? The cat meowed again, a pitiful sound that tugged at my heartstrings. Without thinking, I reached into my bag and pulled out the sandwich I hadn't eaten at lunch. It's not much, but it's better than nothing, right? I unwrapped the sandwich and tore off a small piece of turkey, holding it out to the cat. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, the cat approached and sniffed at the offering. It looked up at me, as if assessing my intentions, before delicately taking the meat from my fingers. As the cat ate, I found myself talking to it, the words spilling out unbidden. You're probably better off than me, you know. At least you're free. Me? I'm trapped in a life I never wanted, too scared to change anything. The cat finished the turkey and looked up at me expectantly. I chuckled, tearing off another piece. Demanding little thing, aren't you? I suppose you've earned it, being the first one to actually listen to me in, well, longer than I care to admit. I don't know how long I sat there, feeding bits of my sandwich to the stray cat and talking about nothing and everything. It was the longest conversation I'd had in months, even if it was entirely one-sided. As I spoke, I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of loneliness and frustration I hadn't even realized was there. Finally, the sandwich was gone, and the cat seemed satisfied. It rubbed against my leg, purring softly, before disappearing back into the alley. "Wait," I called out. But it was gone. I stood up, brushing off my pants, and felt an odd mixture of loss and gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered to the empty alley. The rest of the walk home felt different somehow. The city seemed a little less cold, a little less indifferent. When I finally reached my apartment building, I paused before going in, looking back in the direction I'd come from. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something in my chest. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but it was possibility. The thought that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. I climbed the stairs to my third-floor apartment, each step feeling lighter than the last. As I unlocked my door, I made a mental note to buy some cat food tomorrow, just in case. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself thinking about the cat, its bright eyes, the way it had listened without judgment. It was silly, I knew, to feel so affected by a chance encounter with a stray animal. And yet, I drifted off to sleep, my dreams filled with piercing yellow eyes and shadowy figures. I tossed and turned, caught in a strange landscape where alleyways stretched into infinity and disembodied voices whispered just out of earshot. In one particularly vivid moment, I saw the cat transform, growing and shifting until it became a tall, dark figure with the same gleaming eyes. It reached out to me, its form flickering between feline and human, and I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to shake off the unsettling images from my dream. It was just stress and an overactive imagination, I told myself. Nothing more. But as I finally began to drift off again, a part of me couldn't help but wonder, what if it wasn't? What if that chance encounter in the alley was the beginning of something more? With that thought echoing in my mind, I fell into a fitful sleep, unaware that my life was about to change in ways I could never have imagined. The lonely librarian was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about reality and himself. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my curtains, I made a decision. I would go back to that alley. I would find that cat again. Little did I know that simple decision would set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of my life. The alarm clock blared, startling me awake. Another day beckoned, but for the first time in years I felt a flicker of anticipation. As I got ready for work, I found myself glancing out the window, searching the streets below for a glimpse of a small black cat. "Get it together, Ethan," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. "It's just a cat, just a stray cat." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Somehow, in the space of one evening, that cat had become a symbol of something more, a possibility of change, of connection. I left my apartment that morning with a spring in my step and a bag of newly purchased cat food tucked under my arm. The lonely librarian was gone, replaced by a man on a mission to find a stray cat that, unbeknownst to me, would turn out to be so much more than it appeared. The days began to blur together, each one marked by the same anticipation that quickened my steps as I approached the alley where I'd first encountered the stray cat. It had been 2 weeks since that fateful evening, and our meetings had become the highlight of my otherwise monotonous existence. As I rounded the corner, my heart leapt at the sight of a small black figure sitting patiently at the mouth of the alley. "Hey there, little one," I called out softly, a smile spreading across my face. The cat, I'd taken to calling him Shadow, meowed in response, padding towards me with increasing confidence. Gone was the skittish, malnourished creature I'd first met. Shadow now sported a glossy coat and a healthier frame thanks to our daily rendezvous. I crouched down, pulling out a small container of wet food I'd started carrying in my work bag. "Dinner time," I announced, peeling back the lid. As Shadow ate, I found myself talking, as had become our custom. "You wouldn't believe the day I had," I sighed, absently stroking his back. Mrs. Abernathy came in again, insisting we should stock more romance novels. I swear that woman. I trailed off, realizing I was gossiping about library patrons to a cat. But Shadow just looked up at me with those intelligent yellow eyes, as if encouraging me to continue. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I wonder if this is all there is. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat. At least now I have you to look forward to. Shadow finished eating and rubbed against my leg, purring loudly. I chuckled, scratching behind his ears. Yeah, I hear you. You're just using me for the food, aren't you? As if in response, Shadow headbutted my hand affectionately. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a flicker of something almost human in his eyes. Understanding, perhaps. But I blinked and it was gone. Our little routine continued for weeks, Shadow growing sleeker and more affectionate with each passing day. I found myself opening up more, not just to the cat but at work as well. Sarah noticed the change one afternoon as we were reshelving books together. You seem different lately, Ethan, she observed, a curious look on her face. Happier somehow. Did something change? I hesitated, unsure how to explain that my improved mood was due to befriending a stray cat. I guess I've just been trying to appreciate the little things more, I said finally. Sarah smiled warmly. Well, whatever it is, it suits you. Hey, a bunch of us are going to that new cafe after work. Want to join? To my own surprise, I found myself nodding. You know what? That sounds nice. Thanks, Sarah. As I left work that evening, a light drizzle had started to fall. I hurried to the alley, worried that Shadow might not show up in this weather. But there he was, huddled under a cardboard box, looking miserable. Oh, you poor thing, I murmured, my heart clenching at the sight. Without thinking, I scooped him up, cradling him against my chest. Come on, let's get you somewhere dry. Shadow didn't protest, instead burrowing closer to me, seeking warmth. I could feel his rapid heartbeat against my own, and in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't just a stray cat anymore. This was my friend, and he needed me. My apartment building loomed ahead, and I made a split-second decision. Looks like you're coming home with me tonight, buddy, I whispered, my own pulse quickening at the thought. As I climbed the stairs to my third-floor apartment, a mix of excitement and trepidation swirled in my chest. I'd never had a pet before, never been responsible for another living creature. What if I messed this up? I fumbled with my keys, trying not to jostle Shadow too much. Finally, the door swung open and I stepped into my small, tidy apartment. Welcome home, I said, gently setting Shadow down on the floor. He immediately began exploring, sniffing at every corner and piece of furniture. I watched him, a strange warmth blooming in my chest. For the first time in years, my apartment didn't feel empty. Okay, I said, more to myself than to Shadow. Food, water, litter box. We can do this. The next hour was a flurry of activity as I scrambled to make my apartment cat-friendly. I fashioned a makeshift litter box out of a shallow cardboard box and some shredded newspaper, set out bowls of food and water, and created a cozy bed from an old sweater. By the time I finished, Shadow had made himself comfortable on my couch, watching me with those enigmatic yellow eyes. I collapsed next to him, suddenly exhausted. What am I doing? I muttered, running a hand through my hair. I don't know the first thing about taking care of a cat. Shadow stretched and climbed into my lap, kneading my thigh before settling down. His purr rumbled through me, soothing my frayed nerves. I guess we'll figure it out together, huh? I said, scratching under his chin. That night, as I lay in bed with Shadow curled up at my feet, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. The patter of rain against the window and the soft sound of Shadow's breathing lulled me into a deep sleep. But sometime in the early hours of the morning I jolted awake, my heart racing. I could have sworn I heard footsteps in my living room, the soft pad of bare feet on hardwood floors. I sat up, straining my ears in the darkness. Shadow was no longer on the bed. Shadow? I called out softly, my voice trembling slightly. Silence answered me. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, every nerve on high alert. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I crept towards the bedroom door. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and yanked the door open. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. And there, curled up on the couch, was Shadow. He lifted his head, blinking sleepily at me. I let out a shaky laugh, relief washing over me. "Just my imagination," I muttered, running a hand over my face. I returned to bed, but sleep eluded me. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside, set my nerves on edge. By the time my alarm went off, I was exhausted, my mind spinning with half-formed thoughts and vague unease. As I got ready for work, Shadow wound around my ankles, meowing insistently. I know, I said, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "I'll be back this evening, I promise." But as I closed the apartment door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The comfortable routine I'd settled into over the past week suddenly felt precarious, as if I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite see or understand. At work, I found myself distracted, jumping at small noises and constantly checking my phone, half expecting what? A call from my non-existent cat sitter? A message from Shadow himself? "Ethan," Sarah's voice cut through my reverie. "Are you okay? You seem really out of it today." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well last night. Weird dreams." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Must be something in the air. I've been feeling on edge all day, too." As I walked home that evening, my steps quickened, eager to check on Shadow. But as I approached my building, a chill ran down my spine. There, across the street, I saw a tall, dark figure standing perfectly still, facing my apartment. I blinked and it was gone. "Get a grip, Ethan," I muttered to myself, fumbling for my keys. "You're letting your imagination run wild." But as I opened my apartment door, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadow greeted me with an enthusiastic meow, rubbing against my legs, and I felt some of the tension leave my body. "Hey, buddy," I said, bending down to pet him. "Everything okay here?" Shadow purred in response, but as I straightened up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on the inside of my apartment door, were 3 long, deep scratches that definitely hadn't been there this morning. They were too high to have been made by Shadow unless he'd suddenly grown 3 feet taller. My mind raced, trying to come up with a rational explanation, but coming up empty. I looked down at Shadow, who was now sitting calmly, watching me with those inscrutable yellow eyes. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw something flicker in their depths, something ancient, something knowing. "What's going on here, Shadow?" I whispered, a tremor in my voice. But Shadow just blinked slowly, the picture of feline innocence. As I stood there, my heart pounding, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had invited something into my life that was far more than just a stray cat. The comfortable routine of the past week suddenly felt like a distant memory. In its place was a growing sense of unease, a feeling that I was standing on the precipice of something far beyond my understanding. As I moved further into my apartment, Shadow at my heels, I knew one thing for certain: my life would never be the same again. The scratches on my apartment door haunted me for days. I found myself staring at them during breakfast, tracing their jagged lines with my fingertips before leaving for work, and examining them closely each evening when I returned home. Shadow, for his part, seemed oblivious to my growing unease, content to curl up in sunbeams and demand attention as usual. It was a week after the appearance of the scratches that things took an even stranger turn. I was walking home from the library, my mind preoccupied with a particularly difficult patron interaction, when the hairs on the back of my neck suddenly stood on end. I had the distinct, unsettling feeling of being watched. Trying to appear casual, I glanced over my shoulder. My heart nearly stopped, About half a block behind me was a tall, dark figure. It was hard to make out details in the fading light, but something about its stance, its stillness amidst the bustle of evening commuters, sent a chill down my spine. I picked up my pace, my breathing becoming ragged. "It's nothing," I muttered to myself. "Just another pedestrian. You're being paranoid, Ethan." But when I chanced another look back, the figure was closer. Much closer. And it was definitely following me. Panic surged through me. I broke into a run, no longer caring about appearances. My feet pounded the pavement as I darted through crowds, mumbling breathless apologies as I bumped into people. I could hear my pulse thundering in my ears, drowning out the sounds of the city. I didn't slow down until I reached my apartment building, taking the stairs 2 at a time. My hands shook as I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them in my haste. Finally, I burst through my door, slamming it shut behind me and engaging every lock. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my whole body trembling. Shadow appeared from the bedroom, meowing questioningly. "It's okay," I panted, more to myself than to the cat. "We're okay. It was nothing. Just my imagination." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. What I'd seen, what I'd felt, it was real. Terrifyingly real. I spent the rest of the evening in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every sound. Oh, Shadow seemed to pick up on my anxiety, staying closer to me than usual, his yellow eyes watching me intently. As I prepared for bed, I found myself double and triple checking the locks, drawing all the curtains tight. I even considered pushing my dresser in front of the door, but decided that might be a step too far into paranoia. "Get a grip, Ethan," I muttered, splashing cold water on my face. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, noting the dark circles under my eyes, the pallor of my skin. "You're losing it." That night I tossed and turned, unable to shake the image of the dark figure from my mind. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were a chaotic swirl of shadowy pursuers and endless twisting alleyways. I woke with a start, my alarm blaring. For a moment I lay there, disoriented. Then the events of the previous evening came rushing back, and a knot of dread formed in my stomach. "It's a new day," I told myself firmly as I got ready for work. "Last night was a misunderstanding, mass hysteria or something. It won't happen again." But as I walked to the library, I couldn't help scanning every alley, every shadowy doorway. My nerves were so frayed that when Sarah tapped me on the shoulder at work, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Whoa," she exclaimed, taking a step back. "Sorry, Ethan. Didn't mean to startle you." I forced a laugh, trying to slow my racing heart. No, it's fine. I'm just a little on edge today." Sarah's brow furrowed with concern. "You've seemed pretty stressed lately. Is everything okay?" For a wild moment, I considered telling her everything. About Shadow, about the scratches, about the figure that had chased me. But how could I explain it without sounding completely unhinged? "Yeah, everything's fine," I lied. "Just haven't been sleeping well. You know how it is." Sarah didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. "Well, if you ever want to talk..." I nodded, grateful for her concern even as I felt guilty for brushing her off. "Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it." The rest of the day passed in a blur of nervous energy. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted, but the thought of walking home filled me with dread. I considered calling a cab, but dismissed the idea as too extreme. I couldn't let this paranoia control my life. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out into the evening air. The street was busy with the usual after-work crowd, which I found oddly comforting. Surely nothing could happen with so many witnesses around. I was about halfway home when I saw it. The figure. It was standing across the street, partially hidden in the shadow of a building. But there was no mistaking its intent. It was watching me. My heart began to race. But this time, instead of running, I felt a surge of anger. Enough was enough. Without really thinking it through, I marched across the street, determined to confront whatever or whoever this was. "Hey," I shouted as I approached. "Who are you? Why are you following me?" but as I drew closer, the figure seemed to shift. It was hard to describe, like trying to focus on something underwater. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I stood there, dumbfounded, staring at the empty space where the figure had been moments before. A couple walking by gave me odd looks, and I realized how strange I must appear, yelling at thin air. Shaken, I hurried the rest of the way home. Shadow was waiting for me as always, but this time his presence didn't bring the usual comfort. As I looked into his yellow eyes, so similar to the ones I'd seen in my dreams, a chilling thought occurred to me. "It can't be," I whispered, taking a step back from the cat. "That's impossible." But was it? The scratches on the door, too high for a normal cat. The figure that appeared and disappeared at will. The strange dreams. And Shadow, always there, watching with those knowing eyes. I shook my head, trying to clear it. This was madness. I was letting my imagination run wild, seeing connections where there were none. Shadow was just a cat, a stray I'd taken in out of kindness, nothing more. And yet, as I moved through my evening routine, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The comfortable life I'd built for myself suddenly felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. That night, as I lay in bed with Shadow curled up at my feet, I made a decision. Tomorrow I would start researching. Folklore, urban legends, anything that might explain what was happening to me. Because one thing was becoming increasingly clear. This was not just in my head. As I drifted off to sleep, my last conscious thought was of yellow eyes watching me from the darkness. And in my dreams, I ran through endless library stacks, pursued by a shapeless shadow that always remained just out of sight. I woke with a gasp, my heart pounding. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. The apartment was silent, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and froze. There, silhouetted in the doorway of my bedroom, was a tall, dark figure. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly it raised a hand, beckoning to me. A scream caught in my throat as I scrambled backwards, tangling myself in the sheets. I blinked hard, certain I must still be dreaming. When I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone. But on the floor where it had stood was a single black cat hair. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through my curtains, I sat at my kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of me. Shadow was nowhere to be seen, but the hair I'd found lay on the table, a damning piece of evidence I couldn't ignore. "What are you?" I whispered into the empty apartment. "And what do you want from me?" Only silence answered, but I knew now that my life had irrevocably changed. The lonely librarian was gone, replaced by a man on the brink of a mystery that defied explanation. And as I sat there, watching the sun rise on a new day, I knew that I would not rest until I uncovered the truth, no matter where it led me. The library had always been my sanctuary, a place where the orderly rows of books and the hushed atmosphere brought me comfort. But now, as I moved through the stacks, reshelving returned items, every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I found myself jumping at the slightest sound, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. "Ethan?" Sarah's voice made me start, nearly dropping the book I was holding. She stood at the end of the aisle, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay? You seem jumpy." I forced a smile, trying to steady my hands. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little tired, I guess." Sarah frowned, clearly not buying it. "You've been tired for weeks now. What's really going on?" For a moment, I considered telling her everything. About Shadow, the mysterious figure, the scratches on my door. But how could I explain it without sounding completely unhinged? "It's nothing, really," I insisted, turning back to the shelves. "Just haven't been sleeping well lately." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You know you can talk to me, right? If something's wrong, I mean." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Sarah lingered for a moment longer, then sighed and walked away. As soon as she was gone, I sagged against the bookshelf, my heart racing. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of nervous energy, By the time I clocked out, my hands were shaking, and a dull headache throbbed behind my eyes. Instead of heading straight home, I found myself walking to a nearby park, desperate for some fresh air to clear my head. I collapsed onto a bench, watching as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. Families were packing up picnic baskets, dog walkers were making their final rounds, and joggers pounded the paths, squeezing in one last run before dusk. Normal people living normal lives. When had my life become so far from normal? I pulled out my phone, opening the browser. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I typed, "Shapeshifters and folklore." The results were a mix of ancient myths and pop culture references. I scrolled through, my unease growing with each passage I read. Skinwalkers, werewolves, kitsune. Cultures around the world had stories of beings that could change their form at will. But none of it felt quite right. None of it explained the strange connection I felt with Shadow, or the sense of being watched even when I was alone. A notification popped up on my phone, a reminder for my lunch break tomorrow. I stared at it, suddenly realizing how hungry I was. When was the last time I'd eaten a proper meal? As if on cue, my stomach growled loudly. A young couple walking by glanced at me, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. It was time to go home, to face whatever was waiting for me there. The walk back to my apartment felt longer than usual, each step an effort. As I climbed the stairs to my floor, a sense of dread settled over me. What would I find when I opened the door? Shadow, innocently curled up on the couch, or something else? My hand shook as I inserted the key into the lock. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The apartment was dark and quiet. Too quiet. "Shadow?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. No response. I flicked on the lights, half expecting to see the tall, dark figure standing in my living room. But there was nothing out of place. No scratches on the walls, no mysterious puddles on the floor. Just my ordinary, slightly messy apartment. And yet, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Something felt off. I moved through the rooms, checking every corner, every possible hiding place. No sign of Shadow. No sign of anything unusual at all. As I stood in the center of my living room, feeling lost in my own home, a thought struck me. What if I was losing my mind? What if all of this, Shadow, the figure, the scratches, was just a product of an overworked, lonely imagination? The idea was almost a relief. If I was going crazy, at least there was a rational explanation for everything that had been happening. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. "Get it together, Ethan," I muttered to myself. "You're not crazy. You're just tired, stressed, overworked." A soft meow made me look up. Shadow sat in the doorway to my bedroom, watching me with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "Where have you been?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. Shadow just blinked slowly, then padded over to jump onto the couch beside me. As I absently stroked his fur, I felt some of the tension leave my body. This was real. Shadow was real. Whatever else was going on, I wasn't imagining everything. That night, as I tried to sleep, every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside, set my nerves on edge. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with half-formed theories and vague fears. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were a chaotic swirl of shadowy figures and endless chases. I woke with a start several times, certain I'd heard footsteps or whispers, only to find the apartment silent and still. By the time my alarm went off, I was exhausted, my eyes gritty and my head pounding. I stumbled through my morning routine, downing 2 cups of coffee in quick succession. As I was about to leave for work, I paused at the door, looking back at Shadow. He sat on the windowsill, silhouetted against the morning light. "Be good," I said, feeling slightly foolish for talking to a cat. "And stay a cat, okay? No shapeshifting while I'm gone." Shadow just yawned, showing a mouthful of sharp teeth. For a moment I could have sworn they looked longer, more menacing than a normal cat's. But I blinked, and they were back to normal. The workday passed in a haze of anxiety and caffeine. I found myself constantly scanning the library, looking for anything out of place. More than once I thought I saw a tall, dark figure out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. By lunchtime, my nerves were shot. I retreated to the break room, hoping some food would help settle my stomach. As I unwrapped my sandwich, Sarah walked in. "Hey," she said, her tone cautious. "Mind if I join you?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Be my guest." We ate in silence for a few minutes before Sarah spoke again. "Ethan, I'm worried about you. You haven't been yourself lately. Is everything okay at home?" I stared at my half-eaten sandwich, considering my words carefully. I'm not sure," I admitted finally. "Something strange has been happening, but I don't know how to explain it without sounding crazy." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes serious. "Try me. I promise I won't judge." So I told her. Not everything. I left out the part about suspecting Shadow of being a shapeshifter, but I told her about feeling watched, about the scratches on my door, about the figure I'd seen following me. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That sounds terrifying," she said softly. "Have you considered talking to someone, a professional, I mean?" I pulled my hand away, suddenly defensive. "You think I'm crazy?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "No, I don't think you're crazy, but it sounds like you're under a lot of stress, and sometimes that can make us see things that aren't there. A therapist might be able to help you sort through what's real and what's not." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Part of me knew she was right, that a rational outside perspective might be exactly what I needed. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the day, insisted that what was happening was beyond the realm of normal explanation. As I walked home that evening, I found myself taking a different route, doubling back on myself several times to make sure I wasn't being followed. By the time I reached my apartment building, I was exhausted and on edge. I paused outside my door, listening intently. No sounds came from inside. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Shadow was there, curled up on the couch as if he'd never moved. He lifted his head as I entered, meowing a greeting. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice shaky. "Everything okay here?" As if in response, Shadow stretched and jumped down from the couch. He padded over to me, rubbing against my legs. For a moment, everything felt normal. Just a man and his cat reuniting after a long day. But as I bent to pet him, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There on the hardwood floor was a single, long black hair. Too long to be from a cat, too coarse to be my own. I straightened up, my heart pounding. Shadow looked up at me, his yellow eyes unblinking. "What are you?" I whispered, fear and fascination warring within me. Shadow just meowed, the picture of feline innocence. But as I stood there, the long black hair at my feet, I knew that my life had irrevocably changed. The comfortable routines of the past were gone, replaced by a mystery that defied explanation. And as the sun set outside my window, casting long shadows across my apartment, I realized that I was standing on the precipice of something far beyond my understanding. Whatever was happening, whatever Shadow truly was, I was in too deep to turn back now. The paranoia that had been building for weeks settled over me like a heavy cloak, but with it came a strange sense of determination. I would uncover the truth no matter where it led me, no matter what it cost me. As I moved further into my apartment, Shadow at my heels, I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same again. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt, a moment of clarity so intense it left me breathless. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding, sweat beading on my forehead. The digital clock on my nightstand blinked 3:17 a.m., its red numbers casting an eerie glow in the darkness. "It can't be," I whispered, my voice trembling. But even as I said it, I knew it was true. The cat was never around when I saw the shadowy figure. Never. I threw off the covers and stumbled to the living room, flicking on lights as I went. Shadow was curled up on the couch, his black fur a stark contrast against the pale fabric. He lifted his head, blinking sleepily at me. "What are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. Shadow just yawned, showing a mouthful of sharp teeth. I ran a shaky hand through my hair, trying to gather my thoughts. This was insane. Impossible. And yet... I grabbed my laptop from the coffee table and sank into the armchair, keeping one eye on Shadow as I booted up the computer. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I typed, "Shapeshifter's Cat Folklore." The search results were a mix of ancient myths and modern urban legends. I clicked link after link, my unease growing with each passage I read. Cats featured prominently in shapeshifter lore across cultures, from the Bakaneko of Japan to the cat Seath of Celtic mythology. As I read, Shadow stretched and jumped down from the couch. He padded over to me, rubbing against my legs. I flinched away, my skin crawling at the contact. "Stay back," I warned, my voice hoarse. Shadow tilted his head, looking for all the world like a confused house cat. But I wasn't fooled. Not anymore. I spent the rest of the night researching, fueled by a manic energy I'd never experienced before. By the time dawn broke, casting long shadows across my living room, I had filled a notebook with scribbled notes and half-formed theories. I called in sick to work, ignoring the concerned texts from Sarah. This was more important than shelving books or helping patrons find obscure titles. This was everything. As the day wore on, I found myself falling down a rabbit hole of increasingly outlandish theories. Alien cats, government experiments, interdimensional beings. Each idea seemed more far-fetched than the last, and yet, in the face of what I'd experienced, how could I discount any of them? Shadow watched me from various perches around the apartment, his yellow eyes never leaving me for long. I found myself talking to him, or rather at him, as I paced. "Why me?" I demanded, running my hands through my hair for what felt like the 100th time. "What do you want?" Shadow predictably didn't answer. He just blinked slowly, his tail twitching. As evening approached, I realized I hadn't eaten all day. My stomach growled loudly, reminding me that, shapeshifter or not, I was still human and had human needs. I moved to the kitchen, my eyes never leaving Shadow as I prepared a simple sandwich. As I ate standing at the counter, a plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but I had to know the truth. "Okay," I said, wiping crumbs from my mouth. "Here's the deal. I'm going to pretend to go to sleep, and then we'll see what you really are." Shadow yawned, showing those unnervingly sharp teeth again. I went through the motions of my bedtime routine, hyper-aware of Shadow's presence. I changed into pajamas, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed. But instead of turning off the light, I grabbed a book from my nightstand and pretended to read. Hours passed. My eyes grew heavy, my body screaming for real rest. But I forced myself to stay awake, watching Shadow from the corner of my eye. Just as I was about to give up, convinced I was truly losing my mind, it happened. Shadow, who had been curled up at the foot of the bed, stood and stretched. But the stretch didn't stop. His body began to elongate, fur receding, limbs lengthening. I watched, paralyzed with a mixture of fear and fascination, as the cat I had taken in transformed into the tall, dark figure that had been haunting me for weeks. A scream caught in my throat as the figure turned towards me, yellow eyes glowing in the dim light. I scrambled backwards, tangling myself in the sheets. What are you?" I managed to choke out. The figure tilted its head, an eerily familiar gesture. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant with an accent I couldn't place. "I am what you humans would call a shapeshifter," it said, though that term is a gross oversimplification of what I truly am. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Why me? Why have you been stalking me?" The creature. I couldn't think of it as Shadow anymore. Took a step closer. I pressed myself against the headboard, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. "I wasn't stalking you, Ethan. it said, my name sounding strange in its otherworldly voice. I was observing, learning. You humans are fascinating creatures. But why me? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. The shapeshifter's mouth curved into what might have been a smile. Because you were kind, because you were lonely, because you needed something to believe in beyond your mundane existence. I shook my head, trying to clear it. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. I don't understand, I said. The creature sighed, a surprisingly human sound. No, I suppose you wouldn't. Your kind rarely does. But perhaps I can show you. It extended a hand towards me, long fingers ending in sharp claw-like nails. I stared at it, my body trembling. What will happen if I take your hand? I asked. You'll see the world as I see it, the shapeshifter replied. You'll understand truths that your human mind can barely comprehend. You'll be more. I hesitated, my hand hovering inches from the creature's. Everything in me screamed that this was dangerous, that I should run, call the police, do anything but accept this impossible offer. But another part of me, a part I barely recognized, was curious, excited even. This was beyond anything I had ever experienced, beyond anything I had ever dreamed possible. Will it hurt? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. The shapeshifter's yellow eyes softened slightly. Change always hurts, Ethan. But I promise you it will be worth it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Then, before I could change my mind, I grasped the creature's hand. The world exploded into light and sound. I felt my body stretching, changing, becoming something other. I saw glimpses of realities beyond my own, heard whispers in languages no human tongue could pronounce. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I found myself back in my bedroom, gasping for breath. But everything was different, sharper, more vibrant. I could hear the heartbeats of the mice in the walls, smell the lingering scent of my neighbor's dinner from hours ago. I looked down at my hands, half expecting to see fur or claws, but they looked the same as always. And yet, I knew I was fundamentally changed. The shapeshifter, I couldn't think of a better name for it, stood watching me, its expression unreadable. What happens now? I asked, my voice hoarse. Now, it said, you learn, you grow, you become more than you ever thought possible. As dawn broke outside my window, casting long shadows across my bedroom, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. The lonely librarian was gone, replaced by something more. I stood on shaky legs, moving to the window. The city spread out before me, familiar and yet utterly new. I could see the ebb and flow of energy, the hidden currents that connected all living things. I don't know if I'm ready for this, I said softly. The shapeshifter moved to stand beside me, its presence no longer terrifying but comforting. No one ever is, it replied, but you will adapt. You will thrive. As the sun rose on a new day, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The world I had known was gone, replaced by something far more vast and wondrous than I could have ever imagined. And as I stood there, the shapeshifter by my side, I felt a thrill of excitement. Whatever came next, whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. The lonely librarian was gone. In his place stood a being on the cusp of understanding truths beyond human comprehension. And as I took my first steps into this new reality, I couldn't help but smile. The adventure, it seemed, was just beginning. The world had shifted on its axis, and I was struggling to find my footing. The revelation that Shadow was a shapeshifter, and that I had somehow been changed by our encounter, left me reeling. I stumbled through the next few days in a daze, calling in sick to work and barely leaving my apartment. On the third day, as I stood staring blankly into my refrigerator, a sharp knock at the door jolted me back to reality. I froze, my heart racing. Who could it be? Had someone noticed the strange occurrences? Were they coming for me? Ethan, it's Sarah. Are you in there? I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. Just Sarah. Normal human Sarah. I glanced at Shadow, who was perched on the kitchen counter, watching me with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. Stay, I whispered, pointing at him. Then louder, coming. I opened the door to find Sarah standing there, concern etched on her face. Hey, she said, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. You look rough. Are you okay? I forced a smile, acutely aware of how I must appear, unshaven, hair a mess, wearing the same clothes I'd had on for days. Yeah, just a bad flu. I'm feeling better, though. Should be back at work soon. Sarah didn't look convinced. Ethan, I'm worried about you. You've been acting strange for weeks, and now this. Are you sure there isn't something else going on? For a wild moment, I considered telling her everything. About Shadow, about the transformation, about the new world I was only beginning to understand. But how could I explain it without sounding completely insane? I'm fine, really, I insisted, plastering on what I hoped was a reassuring smile. Just needed some time to rest and recover. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but if you need anything at all, please call me. Promise? I promise, I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. As I closed the door behind her, I leaned against it, closing my eyes. The guilt of deceiving Sarah, one of the few people who genuinely seemed to care about me, sat heavy in my chest. You can't tell her, you know, a deep voice said from behind me. I whirled around to find the shapeshifter, no longer in cat form, standing in my living room. Even after days of this, the sight still sent a jolt of fear and awe through me. I know, I replied, running a hand through my tangled hair. But I hate lying to her. The shapeshifter tilted its head, an eerily familiar gesture. Lies are sometimes necessary to protect those we care about. Your world isn't ready for the truth of what exists beyond its narrow understanding. I sighed, moving to collapse onto the couch. So what now? I can't just go back to my old life. Not after everything that's happened. The shapeshifter's yellow eyes seemed to glow in the dim light of the apartment. Now, Ethan, the hunt begins. I sat up straighter, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through me. The hunt? What do you mean? You've been given a gift, the creature said, its voice resonating with power. The ability to see beyond the veil that separates your world from others. But with that gift comes responsibility. There are things that slip through the cracks between realities. Dangerous things. It's our job to find them, to stop them from causing harm. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. And how exactly are we supposed to do that? The shapeshifter's mouth curved into what might have been a smile. We start with research. Your skills as a librarian will be more useful than you might think, and so began the strangest few days of my life. I returned to work, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy while secretly combing through every book on folklore, mythology, and the occult that I could get my hands on. The shapeshifter, once again in cat form, accompanied me, drawing curious looks from my coworkers. I didn't know you had a cat, Ethan, Sarah said one afternoon, reaching down to pet Shadow. I tensed, but the shapeshifter just purred, playing its role perfectly. Oh yeah, I said, trying to sound casual. Recent addition. He, helps with my anxiety. Sarah smiled, scratching Shadow behind the ears. Well, he's adorable, and I'm glad you're feeling better. As she walked away, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Shadow looked up at me, and I could have sworn I saw amusement in those yellow eyes. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I muttered under my breath. That night, back in my apartment, I spread out my notes on the coffee table. Books and printouts covered every available surface. a chaotic map of myths and legends from around the world. "Okay," I said, running a hand through my hair. "I've got information on everything from skinwalkers to kitsune to jinn, but how do we know what we're actually looking for?" The shapeshifter, back in its humanoid form, stood by the window, gazing out at the city. "You'll know," it said cryptically. "The gift I've given you. It's more than just enhanced senses. You'll be able to feel when something isn't right, when something doesn't belong in this reality." I sighed in frustration. "That's not very helpful. Can't you just, I don't know, point me in the right direction?" The creature turned to face me, its expression unreadable. "This isn't a game, Ethan. It's not something I can simply hand to you. You need to learn, to grow into your new abilities. The hunt is as much about discovering yourself as it is about finding these entities." I was about to argue further when suddenly I felt it. A chill ran down my spine, and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. It was like a discordant note in an otherwise harmonious symphony. Something was wrong. "You feel it, don't you?" the shapeshifter said, its voice low and intense. I nodded, unable to speak. The sensation was overwhelming, a mixture of fear and exhilaration unlike anything I'd ever experienced. "Then let's go," the creature said, moving towards the door. "Go? Go where?" I asked, scrambling to grab my jacket. The shapeshifter paused, looking back at me with those glowing yellow eyes. "To hunt." We moved through the night-shrouded streets of Chicago, the shapeshifter leading the way. I followed, my senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to hold potential danger. Every unexpected sound made me jump. As we neared the lakefront, the feeling of wrongness intensified. I could almost taste it in the air, a metallic tang that set my teeth on edge. "There," I whispered, pointing towards a small park. A figure stood beneath a streetlight, its form flickering and shifting in a way that defied natural explanation. The shapeshifter nodded approvingly. "Good. You're learning quickly. Now we approach carefully. Remember what I taught you." Heart pounding, I followed the creature's lead. We moved silently through the shadows, drawing closer to the entity that didn't belong in our world. As we neared, I could see it more clearly. It looked almost human, but its proportions were off. Its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid, and its eyes, when it turned to look at us, were solid black. "What is it?" I whispered, fear threatening to overwhelm me. "A wraith," the shapeshifter replied, its voice barely audible. "A being of pure energy, feeding on the life force of humans. We need to send it back to its own realm before it can cause any more harm." I swallowed hard, trying to remember everything I'd read over the past few days. "How do we do that?" The shapeshifter turned to me, its yellow eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. "We use the gift I gave you. Focus, Ethan. Feel the energy around you, the connections between all living things. The wraith is a disruption in that energy. You can push it back through the veil." I closed my eyes, concentrating. At first I felt nothing but my own fear and doubt. But then slowly I began to sense it, the web of energy that connected everything, and there, like a tear in fabric, was the wraith. Without thinking, I reached out with my mind, pushing against the anomaly. The wraith screeched, a sound that set my teeth on edge. It lashed out, spectral tendrils whipping through the air. "Keep going," the shapeshifter urged. "You're doing it." I gritted my teeth, pushing harder. The world around me seemed to fade away, leaving nothing but the struggle between me and this otherworldly entity. With a final, desperate push, I felt something give way. The wraith let out one last unearthly wail, and then it was gone. The tear in reality closed, leaving behind nothing but a faint shimmer in the air. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath. The shapeshifter knelt beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Well done, Ethan," it said, and I could hear a note of pride in its voice. "Your first hunt, and you've already banished a wraith. You're a natural." I looked up, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration coursing through me. That was intense. Is it always like that? The creature helped me to my feet, its yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. Every hunt is different, but yes, it's always intense. This is the reality you've stepped into, Ethan. A world of wonders and terrors beyond human imagination. As we made our way back to my apartment, I felt changed. The lonely librarian was gone, replaced by something more. A hunter, a protector, someone who could see the truth of the world and act to defend it. The hunt had begun, and I knew that my life would never be the same again. But as I walked through the night-shrouded streets of Chicago, the shapeshifter by my side, I felt a thrill of excitement. Whatever came next, whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. The adventure, it seemed, was just beginning. The weeks following my first hunt blurred together in a whirlwind of research, training, and increasingly dangerous encounters with otherworldly entities. By day, I maintained my facade as a mild-mannered librarian. By night, I delved deeper into the hidden world that existed alongside our own, guided by the shapeshifter I had once known as Shadow. But as my power grew, so did my unease. The constant secrecy, the weight of responsibility, the gnawing fear that one day I might not be strong enough to face what came through the veil. It was all taking its toll. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when things came to a head. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by ancient tomes and hastily scribbled notes, my head pounding from hours of intense study. There has to be a way to close the rifts permanently, I muttered, more to myself than to the shapeshifter lounging in cat form on the windowsill. We can't keep doing this forever. It's not sustainable. The cat's form shimmered, elongating into the now familiar humanoid figure. Yellow eyes regarded me with a mixture of concern and something that might have been pity. "Ethan," the creature said, its voice resonating with otherworldly power, "you're pushing yourself too hard. These things take time, centuries even. You can't expect to master them in a matter of weeks." I slammed my hand on the table, frustration boiling over. We don't have centuries. Every night more of these things slip through. People are getting hurt, even if they don't realize it. There has to be a way to stop it for good. The shapeshifter was silent for a long moment, its gaze intense. Finally it spoke, each word measured and careful. "There is a ritual, an ancient and dangerous one. It's said to have the power to seal the rifts between realities." I sat up straighter, hope surging through me. "Why didn't you tell me about this before? We could have—" "Because it's incredibly risky." The creature cut me off, its tone sharp. "The power required, it's not something to be trifled with. Many have tried and failed, often with catastrophic consequences." I stood, pacing the small confines of my apartment. "But it could work, right? If we did it correctly?" The shapeshifter's yellow eyes followed my movement. "Theoretically, yes, but Ethan, you must understand the gravity of what you're suggesting. This isn't like banishing a single entity. This ritual, if done wrong, could tear apart the very fabric of reality." I stopped pacing, turning to face the creature. "Then teach me. Show me how to do it right, please." For a moment I thought the shapeshifter would refuse, but then it nodded, a look of resignation passing over its inhuman features. "Very well. But remember, I warned you of the dangers." The next few days were a blur of intense preparation. We gathered rare herbs and crystals, drew complex diagrams on my apartment floor, and rehearsed the intricate series of gestures and incantations required for the ritual. All the while, a sense of foreboding grew in the pit of my stomach, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the potential reward. An end to the constant battles, a chance to truly protect the world I had sworn to defend. Finally, on a moonless night, we were ready. I stood in the center of the ritual circle, my heart pounding. The shapeshifter stood just outside, its yellow eyes glowing in the candlelight. "Are you sure about this, Ethan?" It asked one last time. Once we begin, there's no turning back. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I'm sure. Let's do this. With trembling hands, I began the ritual. Words in languages long forgotten spilled from my lips as I moved through the complex series of gestures we had practiced. The air in the apartment grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin tingle. As I neared the climax of the ritual, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The candles flickered, their flames growing taller, casting wild shadows on the walls. A wind that shouldn't have been possible indoors whipped around me, tugging at my clothes and hair. Ethan, the shapeshifter's voice cut through the howling wind. Something's wrong. The energies are... But it was too late. I was too far into the ritual to stop. Power surged through me, more intense than anything I had ever experienced. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. I shouted the final words of the incantation, my voice barely audible over the roar of otherworldly energies. For a moment, everything went still. Then, with a sound like reality itself, tearing, a blinding light erupted from the center of the ritual circle. I screamed, the light searing my eyes, the power threatening to tear me apart. I felt the shapeshifter's presence nearby, its own energy intertwining with the chaotic forces swirling around us. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The light faded, the wind died down, and I found myself on my hands and knees gasping for breath. Did it work? I managed to choke out, blinking spots from my vision. But as my sight cleared, my blood ran cold. This wasn't my apartment. The walls were twisted and warped, shadows moving of their own accord. The air felt thick and oppressive, carrying scents that were alien and wrong. "Oh, Ethan," the shapeshifter's voice came from behind me, heavy with sorrow. "What have you done?" I turned to face the creature, fear clawing at my throat. "Where are we? What happened?" The shapeshifter's form seemed to flicker and shift, as if struggling to maintain its shape in this strange environment. The ritual, it didn't close the rifts. It tore open a new one. We've been pulled into a realm between realities, a place not meant for beings like us. Horror washed over me as the full implications of what had happened sank in. Can we go back? Reverse it somehow? The creature's yellow eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of something I had never seen there before. Fear. I don't know, Ethan, this place, it's unlike anything I've encountered before. The rules here are different. As if to emphasize its point, a section of what might have been a wall suddenly liquefied, flowing like water before re-solidifying in a new, impossible configuration. In the distance, I heard sounds that no earthly creature could have made. "What do we do now?" I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. The shapeshifter moved closer, its presence oddly comforting in this nightmarish realm. "We survive, we learn, and we try to find a way back. But Ethan, you must understand, time moves differently here. What feels like hours to us might be days, weeks, or even years in our own reality." The weight of what I had done crashed down on me. In my arrogance, my impatience to solve everything at once, I had not only failed to close the rifts, but had trapped myself and the shapeshifter in a realm of nightmares. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "This is all my fault. I should have listened to you." The creature placed a hand on my shoulder, its touch grounding me in this shifting, uncertain world. "What's done is done. Regret will not help us now. We must focus on survival and finding a way home." I nodded, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. As I looked around at the twisted landscape that surrounded us, I felt a resolve hardening within me. I had gotten us into this mess, and I would find a way to get us out. "Where do we start?" I asked, pushing myself to my feet. The shapeshifter's form shimmered, settling into something more suited to this strange environment. Part feline, part humanoid, wholly alien. "We explore. We learn the rules of this place. And we stay together. This realm is dangerous, Ethan. more dangerous than anything you faced before. As if in response to its words, a piercing shriek echoed in the distance. I tensed, my newly enhanced senses screaming danger. "What was that?" I whispered, scanning the shifting landscape. "Our first challenge, I suspect," the shapeshifter replied, its voice grim. "Remember your training, Ethan. Everything you've learned will be put to the test here." I swallowed hard, fear and determination warring within me. The lonely librarian I had once been seemed like a distant memory now. In his place stood a being caught between worlds, facing challenges beyond human comprehension. As we set off into the nightmare realm, the shapeshifter a comforting presence at my side, I couldn't help but wonder, would I ever see my own world again? And if I did, how changed would I be by this experience? The failed ritual had set us on a path I could never have imagined. But as we ventured deeper into this twisted reality, I made a silent vow. I would find a way back. I would fix what I had broken, and I would never again underestimate the powers I was dealing with. The hunt had taken an unexpected turn, but it was far from over. In fact, I realized with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, it had only just begun. Time lost all meaning in this twisted dimension. What felt like days might have been mere hours, or perhaps centuries had passed in the blink of an eye. The landscape around us shifted constantly, defying all laws of physics and reason. Mountains of writhing flesh would erupt from the ground, only to melt away into seas of liquid light. The sky, if it could be called that, pulsed with colors that had no names in any human language. I stumbled forward, my mind struggling to process the ever-changing environment. The shapeshifter moved beside me, its form fluid and adaptable in this realm of chaos. How long have we been here?" I gasped, my voice hoarse from disuse. The creature turned its yellow eyes towards me, their glow seeming to pierce through the swirling mist that surrounded us. "Time has no meaning here, Ethan. We must focus on survival, on finding a way back. Nothing else matters." As if to emphasize its point, a chasm suddenly opened beneath our feet. I let out a strangled cry as we plummeted into darkness, only to land softly on a surface that felt like living moss. The walls around us pulsed with an eerie bioluminescence, casting everything in a sickly green glow. "This place," I muttered, running a hand through my tangled hair. "It's alive, isn't it? All of it?" The shapeshifter nodded, its form rippling like water. "In a sense. This realm exists at the intersection of countless realities. What we perceive is merely our mind's attempt to make sense of the incomprehensible." A sound echoed through the organic corridor we found ourselves in, a sound that sent chills down my spine. It was laughter, but not any laughter I had ever heard before. It was the mirth of something ancient and utterly alien. "We're not alone here," I whispered, my heart racing. "We never were," the shapeshifter replied grimly. "Come, we must keep moving." We pressed on through the ever-shifting landscape. At times we walked through forests of crystalline trees that sang mournful melodies as wind that wasn't wind brushed against their branches. Other times we found ourselves wading through seas of memories, fragments of lives lived and unlived swirling around us like schools of fish. Throughout it all, I caught glimpses of other beings, creatures that defied description, entities of pure energy, things that seemed to exist in more dimensions than I could perceive. Some ignored us, while others watched with unsettling interest. "Why aren't they attacking us?" I asked during a rare moment of relative calm. We had found ourselves in a pocket of stability, a small clearing in what appeared to be a forest of wind chimes, each one crafted from bones of unknown origin. The shapeshifter's form solidified slightly, taking on a more humanoid appearance. Many of them don't perceive us as we perceive them. To some, we might be little more than fleeting thoughts. To others, we could be gods. It's best not to draw unnecessary attention. As if summoned by its words, A figure emerged from between the chiming bone structures. It was vaguely humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Limbs too long, joints bending in impossible ways. Its face, if it could be called that, was a swirling vortex of features that never quite settled into a recognizable form. "Well, come," it said, its voice an unsettling chorus of tones. New ones. Lost found lost. Yes, no, maybe. I stepped back, my body tensing for a fight, but the shapeshifter placed a restraining hand on my arm. "We seek passage," it said, its voice taking on a resonance I had never heard before. "We do not belong in this realm." The entity tilted its ever-shifting head. Belong. All, none, some belong. Passage, blockage, flow. Price, gift, sacrifice. I looked at the shapeshifter, confusion and fear warring within me. What is it saying? Can it help us? "It's offering to guide us," the creature replied, its yellow eyes never leaving the entity. "But there will be a cost. There always is." The vortex-faced being stretched out a hand, or perhaps it was a tentacle, or a beam of light. It was hard to tell in this place where reality was so fluid. Choice, it intoned. Follow, lead, lose. Decide, commit, regret. I swallowed hard, looking to the shapeshifter for guidance. But I knew deep down that this was my decision to make. I had gotten us into this mess with my arrogance and impatience. It was up to me to get us out. "We'll follow you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But know this, we're not prey, and we're not powerless. Try to deceive us, and you'll regret it." The entity's face vortex spun faster for a moment, and I could have sworn I heard amusement in its discordant voice. "Brave, foolish, wise. Come follow lead." As we set off after our strange guide, the landscape around us began to shift more rapidly than ever before. We walked through memories that weren't our own, experienced lifetimes in the span of heartbeats, and witnessed the birth and death of entire universes. Through it all, I clung to my sense of self, terrified of losing who I was in this sea of infinite possibilities. The shapeshifter remained a constant presence at my side, its familiar energy anchoring me to reality, or what passed for reality in this place. "How much further?" I gasped after what felt like eons of travel. My mind was reeling, overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of everything I had seen and experienced. Our guide, which had been leading us through a canyon formed from the crystallized dreams of long-dead gods, paused. "Close, far, everywhere," it said cryptically. "Last first only test remains." Before I could ask what it meant, the ground beneath our feet vanished. We fell through layers of reality, each one stranger than the last. I saw versions of myself, lives I could have lived, choices I could have made. I saw the shapeshifter in countless forms, some beautiful, some terrifying. And then, with a jolt that knocked the breath from my lungs, we landed. I found myself standing in my apartment. Everything was exactly as I remembered it, down to the coffee mug I had left on the counter the night of the failed ritual. What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. The shapeshifter, now in its familiar cat form, padded across the floor. "A test, I believe. Or perhaps a trap. Be on your guard, Ethan." Our guide was nowhere to be seen, but its voice echoed around us. "Choice. Stay, go, become. Truth lies, reality." I moved through the apartment, every detail perfect and familiar. It felt so real, so normal after the chaos we had been through. Part of me wanted nothing more than to collapse onto my couch to pretend that everything had been a strange dream. But as I neared the front door, I hesitated. This isn't real, is it? It's just another illusion. The shapeshifter's yellow eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. You're learning, Ethan, but the question remains, what will you do with that knowledge? I stood there, hand on the doorknob, torn between the comfort of the familiar and the truth of our situation. It would be so easy to stay, to lose myself in this perfect replica of my old life. But that life was gone. I had changed, grown, experienced things beyond human comprehension. There was no going back. Not really. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and opened the door. Instead of my hallway, I saw a swirling vortex of energy, a rift between realities. "Well done," the shapeshifter said, moving to stand beside me. "You've passed the test. The way home is open to us." But as we stood on the threshold between worlds, a terrible realization dawned on me. "Wait," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "How do we know this is really the way back? What if it's just another trick, another layer of illusion?" The shapeshifter was silent for a long moment, its form flickering between cat and humanoid. "We don't know," it admitted finally. "In this realm, certainty is a luxury we cannot afford. We can only trust our instincts and hope." I looked out into the swirling chaos beyond my apartment door, fear and excitement warring within me. "And if we're wrong? If this leads us even further from home?" "Then we face whatever comes together," the creature replied, its voice filled with a warmth I had never heard before. "You've grown strong, Ethan. Whatever lies beyond that portal, I believe you're ready to face it." I nodded, squaring my shoulders. The lonely librarian I had once been was gone, replaced by someone or something new, someone who had walked between worlds and faced the incomprehensible. "Together, then," I said, reaching out to place a hand on the shapeshifter's shoulder. As one, we stepped through the portal, leaving the false comfort of my apartment behind. The vortex of energy engulfed us, tearing us apart and putting us back together in ways I couldn't begin to understand. And through it all, one thought burned in my mind. Whatever waited for us on the other side, I was ready to face it. The nightmare realm had changed me, tested me, nearly broken me. But I had survived. I had learned. As we hurtled through the space between realities, I closed my eyes and embraced the uncertainty. The hunt, it seemed, was far from over. But for the first time since this all began, I felt truly prepared for whatever came next. The nightmare realm faded behind us, but its lessons and its horrors would stay with me forever. Whatever reality we emerged into, I knew I would never be the same. And somehow that thought didn't scare me anymore. It excited me. The vortex spat us out onto cold, hard ground. I gasped, filling my lungs with air that tasted blessedly normal after the alien atmospheres of the nightmare realm. Slowly, I opened my eyes, half afraid of what I might see. We were in an alley. A perfectly ordinary, slightly grimy Chicago alley. The brick walls, the overflowing dumpsters, the distant sound of traffic. It was all achingly familiar. "Are we back?" I asked, my voice hoarse. The shapeshifter, once again in its cat form, padded around the alley, sniffing cautiously. "It appears so," it said. "But appearances can be deceiving, as we've learned." I pushed myself to my feet, my body aching in ways I couldn't quite describe. How long had we been gone? Days? Weeks? Years? I patted my pockets, relieved to find my wallet and phone still there. The screen lit up when I pressed the power button, and I felt a jolt of shock. "3 days," I whispered. "We've only been gone 3 days." The shapeshifter's yellow eyes met mine. Time moves differently between realities. What felt like an eternity to us was merely a long weekend here. I leaned against the alley wall, suddenly overwhelmed. We were back, but nothing felt the same. I closed my eyes, and fragmented visions from the nightmare realm flashed through my mind. Impossible landscapes, alien entities, the constant shifting of reality itself. How do we just go back? I asked, opening my eyes to look at the shapeshifter. After everything we've seen, everything we've been through, how do we return to normal life? The cat's form shimmered, elongating into its more humanoid shape. "We don't," it said simply. "You've been changed, Ethan. There's no going back to who you were before, but that doesn't mean you can't move forward." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a barrage of notifications, missed calls from work, concerned text messages from Sarah, even an email from my landlord asking if everything was okay. "They're worried about you," the shapeshifter observed. "Your disappearance didn't go unnoticed." I scrolled through the messages, a knot forming in my stomach. What do I tell them? How do I explain where I've been? The creature placed a hand on my shoulder, its touch grounding me in reality. You tell them as much of the truth as you can without revealing what they're not ready to know. You were ill, overwhelmed, needed time to yourself. It's not a lie, not really. I nodded, taking a deep breath. And what about all of this? I gestured vaguely, encompassing the shapeshifter, our experiences, the knowledge we'd gained. Do we just pretend it never happened? The shapeshifter's yellow eyes seemed to glow in the dim light of the alley. No, we use what we've learned. Our journey through the nightmare realm wasn't just a trial, Ethan. It was an education. As we made our way back to my apartment, the shapeshifter once again in its cat form, I tried to process everything that had happened. The sights, sounds, and sensations of the nightmare realm were still vivid in my mind, but they were beginning to take on a dreamlike quality. If it weren't for the constant presence of the shapeshifter, I might have been tempted to believe it had all been some sort of hallucination. My apartment was exactly as we'd left it, the failed ritual circle still etched on the floor. I collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion suddenly hitting me like a physical force. "Rest," the shapeshifter said, jumping up beside me. "Your mind and body need time to adjust. We'll talk more when you've recovered." I wanted to argue, to demand answers and explanations, but my eyelids were already growing heavy. As I drifted off to sleep, I could have sworn I heard whispers in languages no human tongue could pronounce. When I awoke, sunlight was streaming through my windows. For a moment, I was disoriented, half expecting to see the shifting landscapes of the nightmare realm. But no, this was my apartment, solid and real. The shapeshifter was perched on the windowsill, watching me with those unblinking yellow eyes. "How do you feel?" it asked. I sat up, running a hand through my tangled hair. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I admitted. "But also different. Clearer, somehow." The creature nodded. "The experiences you've had have expanded your consciousness. You're perceiving reality in ways you couldn't before." As if to prove its point, I suddenly became aware of everything. The subtle vibrations of the building, the ebb and flow of energy from the city outside, even the faint echoes of realities brushing against our own. It was overwhelming, and I gasped, clutching my head. "Easy," the shapeshifter said, moving to my side. "It will take time to adjust, but this awareness is crucial for what comes next." I looked up, meeting its gaze. What does come next? The creature's form shimmered, settling into its more humanoid shape. Now, we truly begin to understand our enemy, the beings that slip through the cracks between realities. We need to learn why they come, what they want. "I thought we knew that," I said, frowning. "They feed on humans, on our world. Isn't that enough?" The shapeshifter shook its head. "That's a simplification. These entities, they're not just predators. They're refugees, explorers, sometimes even lost souls. Some are malevolent, yes, but others are simply trying to survive in a reality not their own." I stood, pacing the small confines of my living room. So what? We're supposed to feel sorry for them? After everything we've seen, everything they've done? "Not sorry," the creature replied. "Understanding. Only by truly comprehending these beings can we hope to deal with them effectively. And to do that, we need to go to the source." I stopped pacing, a chill running down my spine. "The source? You mean—" The shapeshifter nodded, its yellow eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "We need to find the points where realities intersect, the places where the veil between worlds is thinnest. And we need to study them, to learn the patterns of how and why these entities cross over." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Part of me wanted nothing more than to retreat into the safety of my old life, to pretend that none of this had ever happened. But I knew that was impossible. I had seen too much, learned too much to ever go back. "Where do we start?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The shapeshifter moved to the center of the room, its form rippling like water. "Close your eyes," it instructed. "Focus on the energy around you, the currents of reality that you can now perceive. What do you feel?" I did as it said, closing my eyes and reaching out with senses I was only beginning to understand. At first there was nothing but the usual background noise of the city, but then, slowly, I began to sense something else. A vibration, a resonance that didn't quite fit with the rest of reality. "There's something," I said, my brow furrowing in concentration. "To the north. It feels like a tear, a weak point." "Good," the shapeshifter said, and I could hear approval in its voice. "That's our first destination. But before we go, there's something you need to understand, Ethan." I opened my eyes, meeting its gaze. "What's that?" The creature's expression was solemn. "The more we delve into these mysteries, the more we risk attracting attention, not just from the entities we're studying, but from forces far beyond your current comprehension. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about everything we'd been through, everything I'd seen and experienced. The lonely librarian I had once been seemed like a distant memory now. In his place stood someone, or something, new. Someone who had walked between worlds and faced the incomprehensible. "I'm ready," I said, surprised by the conviction in my voice. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The shapeshifter nodded, a flicker of what might have been pride crossing its inhuman features. "Then let's begin. The hunt for understanding starts now." As we prepared to leave, gathering supplies and steeling ourselves for whatever we might encounter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The world I had known was gone, replaced by something far vaster and more wondrous than I could have ever imagined. And as we stepped out into the Chicago night, the shapeshifter by my side, I knew that our journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The true nature of reality, the secrets of the entities that moved between worlds, it was all out there, waiting to be discovered. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers we might face, I was ready. The nightmare realm had changed me, tested me, nearly broken me, but I had survived. I had learned. And now, I was prepared to uncover truths that would shake the very foundations of reality itself. The hunt for understanding had begun, and I intended to see it through to the end, no matter where it might lead us. The air crackled with an otherworldly energy as we approached the weak point in reality. It was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago, its dilapidated exterior belying the cosmic significance of what lay within. My newly enhanced senses could perceive the subtle distortions in the fabric of space-time, rippling outward like waves on a pond. "Are you ready?" the shapeshifter asked, its form flickering between human and feline, as if unsure which was more appropriate for the situation. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. As ready as I'll ever be. We entered the warehouse cautiously, our footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Dust motes danced in the beams of moonlight that filtered through broken windows, giving the scene an eerily ethereal quality. But it wasn't the abandoned machinery or the graffiti-covered walls that held my attention. It was the shimmering tear in reality that hovered in the center of the room, pulsing with an energy that made my teeth ache. What is it?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. The shapeshifter's yellow eyes glowed in the dim light. "A gateway," it replied, its voice resonating with power. "A bridge between our world and others." As we drew closer, I could see flashes of other realities through the tear. Impossible landscapes, alien skies, beings that defied description. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "How do we close it?" I asked, tearing my gaze away from the hypnotic visions. The shapeshifter shook its head. "Closing it isn't the goal, Ethan. We're here to understand it, to learn its rhythms and patterns. Only then can we hope to manage the flow of entities between worlds. I nodded, trying to focus on the task at hand rather than the mind-bending implications of what we were seeing. We set up our equipment, a bizarre mix of scientific instruments and occult paraphernalia that we had cobbled together over the past few weeks. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, not by anything in our reality, but by entities on the other side of the rift, curious about the beings studying their gateway. Hours passed as we took readings, recorded observations, and attempted to decipher the complex energies swirling around us. The shapeshifter moved with purpose, its knowledge of cosmic forces far surpassing my own. I did my best to keep up, my mind expanding to accommodate concepts that would have been incomprehensible to me just months ago. It was nearing dawn when something changed. The rift pulsed, its energy spiking in a way that set every nerve in my body on edge. "Something's coming through," the shapeshifter warned, its form tensing. I braced myself, ready for battle. But what emerged from the rift wasn't the monstrous entity I had expected. It was me, or rather, a version of me. This Ethan was older, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with years I hadn't yet lived. But it was his eyes that truly shocked me. They glowed with the same otherworldly light as the shapeshifter's. "Hello, Ethan," my older self said, his voice carrying echoes of realities I couldn't begin to comprehend. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. "What? How? Who's we?" The other Ethan smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "The Watchers, the guardians of the spaces between realities. We've been observing you, guiding you, preparing you for this moment." I turned to the shapeshifter, confusion and betrayal warring within me. "Did you know about this? Have you been manipulating me this whole time?" The creature's form rippled, uncertainty clear in its yellow eyes. "Not exactly. I knew you had a greater destiny, but the specifics were hidden even from me." The older Ethan stepped forward, his movements fluid and unnatural. "There was no other way. The path you've walked, the trials you've faced, they were all necessary to prepare you for what comes next." "And what exactly is that?" I demanded, anger rising to replace my shock. My older self gestured to the rift behind him. "The multiverse is in crisis, Ethan. The boundaries between realities are weakening, allowing things through that should never cross over. We need guardians, beings who can walk between worlds and maintain the cosmic balance." I shook my head, overwhelmed by the implications. "And you think I'm supposed to be one of these guardians? I'm just a librarian. I'm not you." "Not yet," the other Ethan said softly. "But you will be. The choice lies before you now. Embrace your destiny, join us in our eternal vigil, or turn away and let the multiverse fall into chaos." The shapeshifter moved to my side, its presence oddly comforting in the face of this cosmic revelation. "The choice must be yours, Ethan, but know that whatever you decide, you won't face it alone." I closed my eyes, my mind racing. Images flashed through my consciousness. The lonely librarian I had once been, the adventures I'd had since meeting the shapeshifter, the wonders and horrors I'd witnessed in the nightmare realm. And now this, a destiny beyond anything I could have imagined. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the warehouse around us had begun to fade, reality itself seeming to warp and shift. The rift pulsed, growing larger, its energies intertwining with the very fabric of space-time. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the rising hum of cosmic forces. "The moment of choice," my older self replied. "The convergence of possibilities. Whatever you decide here will ripple across realities, shaping the fate of the multiverse." I looked to the shapeshifter, seeking guidance, reassurance, anything. But for once, the creature seemed as lost as I was, its form flickering rapidly between shapes as if struggling to maintain coherence in this liminal space. I don't know if I'm ready for this," I admitted, fear and exhilaration warring within me. The other Ethan smiled, a hint of his former self shining through the cosmic being he had become. None of us ever are. But that's what makes us human, even as we become something more. The rift pulsed again, and I felt a pull, an indescribable urge to step forward and embrace the unknown. But something held me back, a final nagging doubt. If I do this, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, if I become you, what happens to who I am now, to the people I care about, the life I've built? My older self's expression softened. They'll be safe, protected by the very balance you'll help maintain. And a part of you will always remember, always cherish the connections you've made. They're what keep us anchored, what remind us of why we do this. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of countless realities pressing down on me. This was it, the moment that would define not just my life, but the fate of existence itself. With a final look at the shapeshifter, my faithful companion through this impossible journey, I made my decision. I stepped forward towards my older self, towards the pulsing rift that promised both wonder and terror. I'm ready, I said, surprised by the conviction in my voice. The other Ethan nodded, pride and sorrow mingling in his otherworldly eyes. He reached out, and as our hands touched, I felt a surge of cosmic energy unlike anything I had ever experienced. Memories that weren't mine, or weren't mine yet, flooded my consciousness. I saw countless worlds, infinite possibilities, the intricate dance of realities that made up the multiverse. And I saw my role in it all, the eternal vigil that awaited me. As the energy built to a crescendo, I turned back one last time. The shapeshifter stood watching, its form now a swirling vortex of potential, as if finally revealing its true nature. Thank you, I said, my voice echoing across realities. For everything. The creature nodded, a gesture that somehow conveyed more emotion than any words could have. And then, with a final pulse of energy that shook the foundations of reality itself, everything changed. I felt my consciousness expand, merging with my older self, becoming something far beyond what I had been. The rift enveloped us, and I saw the multiverse in all its infinite glory. In that moment of transcendence, I understood. The lonely librarian, the reluctant hero, the cosmic guardian, they were all me, all part of the eternal cycle of growth and change that drove the multiverse forward. As my new awareness settled, I found myself standing in a place beyond places, a nexus point between realities. The other Watchers were there, beings of incomprehensible power and knowledge, welcoming me to their ranks. But even as I embraced this new existence, I felt a tug, a connection to the world I had left behind. I knew then that a part of me would always be Ethan the librarian, Ethan the seeker of knowledge. And that connection, that humanity, would be my strength in the cosmic battles to come. The shapeshifter appeared beside me, its form now as fluid and cosmic as my own. The hunt never truly ends, it said, its voice resonating across dimensions. It merely changes. I nodded, understanding at last. This wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. The greatest adventure of all, the eternal quest to maintain the balance of the multiverse. As we set out into the infinite expanse of realities, I carried with me the memories of my former life, the lessons I had learned, and the unshakable determination to protect the cosmic tapestry that bound all of existence together. The lonely librarian was gone, transformed into something far greater. But in becoming a guardian of realities, I had found a purpose beyond anything I could have imagined. And as we ventured into the unknown, I knew that the true journey was only just beginning.